Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into a really crucial area for our digital safety, the move to post-quantum cryptography. We've got a fascinating and pretty timely document as our source. It's the initial public draft of NIST Internal Report 8547, called Transition to Post-Quantum Cryptography Standards from November 2024.
That's right. And it's vital because for years, the cryptographic algorithms that sort of underpin our online world.
Protecting everything.
Exactly. Emails, financial systems, you name it. They've been incredibly robust against, traditional computers.
Yeah.
But the thing is, quantum computers are on the horizon, a potential game changer.
Right.
And when they become powerful enough, they could basically crack the mathematical problems our current crypto relies on. It's a fundamental shift, really.
Okay, so if our current defenses might crumble, post-quantum cryptography, PQC, that's the new shield.
That's the idea. PQC refers to this new generation of cryptographic methods. They're specifically designed to withstand attacks from both, today's computers and the quantum computers of tomorrow.
And NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they're leading the charge.
They are. They've already released initial standards for 3 PQC techniques. First, there's ML-Chem.
Chem, key encapsulation.
Key encapsulation mechanism. It handles the secure exchange of encryption keys. Then there's MLDSA.
Digital signatures?
Yep. Module lattice-based digital signature algorithm. Verifies who created something and that it hasn't been, messed with.
Got it.
And finally, SLH-DSA. Another digital signature type, but it uses a different approach based on hash functions, stateless hash-based.
Okay, 3 new standards. That sounds like a solid first step. But you mentioned this is urgent. Why? I mean, we don't have these, super powerful quantum computers breaking everything right now, do we?
No, not yet. But that's where this threat called Harvest Now, Decrypt Later comes in. It's a very real concern.
Harvest Now, Decrypt Later. Explain that.
Think of it like this. Adversaries, maybe state-level actors, are actively collecting huge amounts of encrypted data today, right now.
It's encrypted with current methods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are long-term strategies that basically just sit on this data, hoard it, and then decrypt it in the future when quantum computers are powerful enough. So think about really sensitive stuff that needs to stay secure for decades. Government secrets, long-term financial records, valuable IP.
Things with a long shelf life.
Precisely. If that data is encrypted now using algorithms that we know are vulnerable to future quantum computers, it could all be exposed years down the line.
Okay, that makes the urgency much clearer. It's not just about the future threat. It's about data being collected now.
Exactly. That's why starting this transition to PQC now isn't just a good idea. It's really essential.
Right. So what's the scope of this NIST report then? What are they trying to achieve with it?
This report, it really lays out NIST's intended roadmap for this massive transition. It identifies the current standards that are going to become vulnerable.
The ones at risk.
Yes. And it highlights the new quantum-resistant standards that we need to start adopting. The core mission really is to get everyone on the same page.
Tech companies, government agencies?
Everyone. Standards bodies, too, so they understand the challenges, understand the new tools available. NIST basically wants to kickstart serious engagement and, accelerate the move towards these PQC methods.
All right, let's get into the weeds a bit. What are some of the current cryptographic standards that are, on the chopping block because of this quantum threat?
Okay, so NIST publishes these Federal Information Processing Standards, FIPS, and also the SP 800 series special publication.
All right, the crypto blueprints.
Yeah, basically. They detail the tools and techniques we use, and many of the public key systems defined in these. They'll eventually be marked as deprecated.
Meaning, don't use this for new stuff.
Pretty much. Their use will be discouraged and ultimately disallowed. Let's start with digital signature algorithms.
Okay, digital signatures, like we said, confirming identity, data integrity, source, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And they often work together with hash functions, those unique digital fingerprints for data, or XOFs, extendable output functions.
Okay.
Historically, NIST-approved algorithms like ECDSA.
Elliptic curve.
Right, elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, also RSA and EDDSA, those are in FIPS 186. And SP 800-186 specifies the particular elliptic curves used with ECDSA and also for key establishment, which we'll get to, mentioned in SP 856A.
And the critical point.
The critical thing is that all of these ECDSA, RSA, EDDSA, they're vulnerable to something called Shor's algorithm.
Which a quantum computer could run.
A sufficiently powerful one, yes. It could break the underlying math problems relatively easily.
So what are the new quantum-resistant signature methods we'll be using instead?
Well, we now have ML-DSA, that's in FIPS 204, based on crystals dilithium. And then there's SLH-DSA, specified in FIPS 205. That comes from the SV&CS Plus proposal. These are designed from the ground up to be secure against quantum attacks.
Different approaches entirely.
Right. And it's also worth mentioning SP 800-208. That covers stateful hash-based signature schemes like LMS and XMSS.
Stateful? What does that mean in practice?
Stateful means the signer has to keep track of, well, state. Specifically, which parts of their private key they've already used for signing. You can't reuse a part.
Like tearing tickets off a roll?
Kind of, yeah. You need to remember which one you used last. This requirement, it can make them a bit less straightforward for general purpose use compared to these stateless schemes like MLDSA and SLHDSA.
Right, that sounds like it could introduce complexities, potential errors maybe?
It can, which is why they might not be suitable for all applications. That's why NIST is also exploring other options. They intend to create a FIPS standard for a signature algorithm based on Falcon.
Another candidate from their process.
Yes. And they're still evaluating other promising candidates in their ongoing PQC standardization process, so more might be coming.
Okay, so that covers signatures. What about how we actually, set up secure communications?
Right.
Generate the keys for encryption.
Right, that's key establishment. Its whole purpose is to securely generate and distribute the secret keys that two parties, authorized parties, will use to encrypt their messages.
The things that actually scramble the data.
Exactly. Currently, the NIST-approved methods are mostly in SP 800-56A. These are based on things like the discrete logarithm problem over finite fields and elliptic curves.
Like Diffie-Hellman.
Yeah, variations of Diffie-Hellman, MQV, those kinds of schemes. And SP 856B covers key establishment using RSA.
And these are also vulnerable, like the signatures.
Yes, unfortunately. They rely on those same types of mathematical problems, discrete log, factoring that quantum computers running Shor's algorithm or similar are expected to solve efficiently, breaking the security.
So what's the PQC replacement here?
The new quantum-resistant standard in this area, the first one finalized, is ML-Chem. That's specified in FIPS 203.
The key encapsulation mechanism we mentioned earlier.
Correct. ML-Chem. It's derived from crystals Kyber. Think of it as a secure way to sort of wrap up a secret key, encapsulate it, so only the intended recipient can unwrap it and use it to establish a shared secret, even over a public channel.
Clever.
And just like with signatures, NIST is still evaluating more chem algorithms in the fourth round of their PQC process, so we expect to see more options become standardized down the road.
Okay, so we've covered signatures and key establishment, the public key stuff that's really vulnerable. What about the workhorses, like symmetric crypto, AES, for example?
That's a really important distinction. Symmetric cryptography, things like AES for encryption or SHA, hashes for integrity, they use the same secret key for both protection and removal, encrypting and decrypting.
And the news is better there.
Much better, yes. The good news is that the existing standards for symmetric crypto are considered significantly more resilient against quantum attacks compared to the public key stuff.
So no big immediate changes needed for AES.
Generally, no. NIST doesn't foresee a major shift away from these for the PQC transition, especially the ones offering at least 128 bits of classical security.
Why 128 bits?
Well, they consider that level of security meets at least their Category 1 post-quantum security level, which is seen as a baseline requirement.
Okay.
However, there's a catch. Symmetric standards that only offer a 112-bit security level. Think 3DS, maybe?
Right.
Those will be disallowed starting in the year 2030. So any systems still relying on those definitely need upgrading, but to stronger symmetric algorithms, not necessarily something totally new like PQC symmetric crypto.
Okay, that's somewhat reassuring on the symmetric side. Now, you mentioned this whole transition is going to take time, a lot of time, potentially.
Yeah.
What are the practical, real-world things we need to think about? Specific use cases.
Absolutely. And history tells us these big crypto upgrades are lengthy, often a decade or more.
Yeah, I remember SHA-1 deprecation took ages.
Exactly. And this PQC transition, given the scale and the fundamental changes, it's likely to be similar, maybe even longer in some areas. There's this concept, sometimes called Mosca's theorem. The report doesn't name it, but the idea is key.
What's the core idea?
It basically forces you to think about 3 timelines. X is how long your data needs to stay secure.
Okay, data lifespan,
Y is how long it will take you to fully transition to PTC.
transition time.
And Z is when we expect a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, a CRQC, to actually exist.
The arrival of the threat.
Right. The theorem states you need to ensure that X plus Y, your data lifespan plus your transition time, is less than Z.
So you need to be fully migrated before a quantum computer arrives that can break data you still need protected.
Precisely. If X plus Y is greater than Z, your data is at risk. Even data encrypted today. This really hammers home the harvest now, decrypt later threat.
Especially for long-lived, sensitive data.
Absolutely. So for you, the listener, if you're dealing with info that needs protection for, say, 20 years, and a full PQC transition might take 5, maybe 10 years.
Then X plus Y is 25 or 30 years.
Right. And if you think Z, the arrival of a CRQC, might be within that window, then the time to start planning and acting is definitely now, not later.
That really frames the urgency. Okay, let's look at some specific examples. How does this affect something like code signing?
Code signing is crucial, right? Verifying software publishers, ensuring code isn't tampered with, it builds trust.
Absolutely.
The devices that verify these signatures need to be able to understand and process the new PQC signatures. This is especially critical where the verification code on the device itself can't be easily updated.
Like embedded systems,
Yeah.
IoT devices, cars.
Exactly. Things that get deployed and might stay out there for years, potentially into the quantum era. If they can't verify PQC signatures, they can be tricked by forged code later on. So they need PQC verification capability built in or updatable.
Makes sense. Long life cycles are a big factor there. What about user and machine authentication? Logging in, accessing resources.
Authentication is a bit different, unlike encryption, where harvest now, decrypt later is the big worry.
Because the secret itself is being protected long term.
Right. Authentication is generally considered secure as long as the crypto is strong at the moment of authentication.
So it's more about real-time security.
Mostly, yes. So systems using vulnerable algorithms for authentication today might function securely right up until a CRQC actually arrives and can break them in real time.
Okay, so maybe less immediate urgency than for encrypted data.
Potentially less urgency for the harvest now aspect,
Mm-hmm.
but upgrades will still be needed eventually to use quantum-resistant methods. This will mean changes to authentication servers, maybe client systems, probably updates to PKI, maybe even new hardware tokens.
Okay, and network security. Things like TLS for websites, VPNs, we use those constantly.
Yeah, critical stuff. These protocols, like TLS, often use different crypto for different parts of the process. There's the key establishment phase.
Setting up the shared secret key.
And then there's authenticating the server, maybe the client,
Right.
because the key established during that initial handshake is what protects the actual data confidentiality afterward.
That's where harvest now, decrypt later, bites again.
Exactly. The encrypted session data could be recorded now and broken later if the key establishment wasn't quantum resistant. So there might be an earlier push to transition the key establishment parts of TLS, VPNs, etc. to PQC.
While the authentication part might transition later.
It could, potentially. Following the logic we just discussed for general authentication, it creates a bit of a split timeline within the same protocol.
Interesting complexity. And finally, what about securing emails and documents? SIAME, things like that.
Right. Digital signatures are key there for authenticity and integrity. Did this email really come from who it says has this document been altered?
Standard use case.
And for the encryption part, protecting the content of the email or document, it's the same story as other confidentiality applications. Definitely vulnerable to harvest now, decrypt later.
So transitioning encryption there is crucial for long-term privacy.
Absolutely.
Wow. This sounds like a truly enormous undertaking. It feels like there might need to be some, I don't know, halfway houses, intermediate steps. The report mentions PQC, classical, hybrid protocols. What are those about?
Yeah, hybrid protocols, they're exactly what they sound like, a temporary combination. You use both a new PQC algorithm and one of the current but ultimately vulnerable classical algorithms together for the same task.
But for key establishment or signing.
Exactly. The underlying idea, the hope, is that the hybrid solution stays secure as long as at least one of the algorithms in the mix remains unbroken.
So it's like having a backup. A safety net during the transition, built-in suspenders.
Kind of, yeah. It could act as a hedge. Maybe you're worried about potential undiscovered weaknesses in the brand new PQC algorithm.
Early days vulnerabilities.
Right. Or maybe some industry regulation still mandates using an older algorithm for a while. So a hybrid approach lets you do both.
But it sounds complicated.
It definitely adds complexity. And complexity in crypto can sometimes introduce new, unexpected security risks. Plus, it usually means higher costs, implementation, performance overhead, maintenance.
So, not a long-term solution.
Generally, no. They're mostly seen as temporary measures, bridges, really, to get us from the classical world to the fully PQC world. If you, the listener, are thinking about hybrid, you really need to weigh that complexity and risk carefully for your specific situation.
Okay. The report mentions hybrid techniques for both key establishment and signatures. How might those work specifically? Let's start with key establishment.
Okay, for hybrid key establishment, you're basically combining secrets from 2 or more different key establishment schemes. NIST actually already has a way to do this, a generic method, in SP 800-566C. It's called composite key establishment.
How does that work?
The basic idea is you generate one shared secret using, say, a classical method like ECDH. Let's call that Z. Then you generate another secret using a different method, maybe a PQC chem like MLchem, call that T. You then combine Z and T, maybe just by concatenating them, ZT, and feed that combined value into your key derivation function.
To get the actual session keys.
Exactly. And NIST is planning to update SP 800-56C to explicitly say that Z, the first secret, can come from any approved scheme, including the new PQC ones like MLchem.
And the security goal.
The goal is that the final derived key stays secure as long as at least one of the components, Z or T, was generated securely. So if ECDH gets broken but MLchem holds, you're still okay, or vice versa.
But needs careful analysis.
Definitely needs case-by-case analysis. NIST is also working on more detailed guidance about how to securely combine keys like this in a document called SP 800-227.
Okay.
And interestingly, the output of MLchem itself is already a shared secret key, so it can actually be used directly as one of the inputs, say the Z's value, in that SP 800-56C composite approach without needing extra steps.
That sounds quite flexible, actually. A potentially useful interim tool. What about hybrid digital signatures? How do they work?
The common approach there is using dual signatures.
Signing the same thing twice.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
You take the same message, the same piece of data, and you sign it using 2 or maybe more different signature algorithms. Perhaps one classical one like RSA or ECDSA and one new PQC one like MLDSA.
And to verify it.
For the signature to be considered valid, all of the individual component signatures must verify successfully. So the verifier needs to check the RSA part and the MLDSA part.
Okay, so it requires support for both algorithms.
Right. NIST standards are okay with this. They accommodate this approach as long as at least one of the algorithms used in the combination is a NIST-approved one.
But NIST isn't mandating dual signatures.
No, they're leaving that decision up to specific applications and implementers. Organizations need to weigh the benefits that potential hedge against algorithm failure against the costs.
Performance hits. Larger signature sizes. More complex validation.
All of the above. Cost, performance, complexity. NIST has said they will accommodate hybrid key establishment and dual signatures in their FIPS 140 validation program, for crypto modules, provided they're combined properly with at least one approved scheme.
Okay, so the option is there if needed. This all leads naturally to the really big question. When? When is this transition actually going to happen? What's the timeline look like for moving to PQC?
Yeah, the million-dollar question. NIST standards themselves usually give broad guidance, but for a more concrete target, especially for the U.S. government, we can look at National Security Memorandum 10, NSM 10.
What does that say?
NSM 10 set a target date, 2035. That's the target for federal systems to complete their migration to PQC to mitigate quantum risks.
2035. Okay, that sounds, well, it sounds like a ways off, but considering everything we've discussed, maybe not that far off in terms of planning and execution.
You're absolutely right. 2035 might seem distant, but for large organizations, complex systems, that's really not a lot of time for a transition this fundamental.
And is 2035 a hard deadline for everyone?
Well, it's the target for federal systems. The report stresses that actual timelines will likely vary quite a bit. It depends on the specific application, how complex it is, and critically, how long the data needs to stay confidential.
Back to that XYZ calculation.
Exactly. Systems handling highly sensitive, long lifespan data might need to transition much earlier than 2035. NIST's own guide for federal crypto transitions, SP 800-131A, is going to be updated with more detailed PQC transition specifics.
And that document, SP 800-131A, uses specific terms for algorithm status, right? Like acceptable, deprecated.
Yes, those terms are important. Acceptable means it's approved for use. Deprecated means use is discouraged, maybe risks are known, proceed with caution, start planning to move off.
Yeah.
Disallowed means it's no longer permitted for protecting new information. And legacy use usually means you can only use a disallowed algorithm to process old data protected by it, like decrypting archives or verifying old signatures, no new stuff.
Got it. The report also brings up security strength and these post-quantum security categories. Yeah. Can you give us a quick rundown on those? They seem important for timelines.
They are. Transition schedules are often driven by the required security strength. Historically, we measured that in bits of security against classical attacks, but estimating strength against quantum attacks is way harder, more uncertain.
Right, it's a new ballgame.
So NIST introduced these post-quantum security categories. They're benchmarked against the quantum attack resistance of well-understood symmetric crypto.
Like AES.
Exactly. Like, how hard is it for a quantum computer to break AES 128, AES 192, AES 256, or find collisions in SHA 256, SHA 384, etc.? These benchmarks define categories 1 through 5.
So category 1 is the lowest PQC level.
Yes. Roughly equivalent quantum resistance to breaking AES 128. Category 3 is like AES 192, Category 5 like AES 256. It gives us a standardized way to compare the new PQC algorithms.
Okay, a useful yardstick. So applying this, what are the specific timelines for digital signatures? When do the old ones get deprecated or disallowed?
Okay, looking at the classical signatures, ECDSA, RSA, EDDSA, the versions that only offer 112 bits of classical secure.
Lower security variants.
Right. NIST intends to mark those as deprecated after 2030. They won't be fully disallowed until after 2035, allowing some time for migration.
What about the stronger classical signatures, 128-bit and up?
All classical public key signatures, regardless of strength, 128-bit or more, are slated to be disallowed after 2035.
Okay, a clear end date for those.
Yes. And on the PQC side, the new algorithms, MLDSA and SLHDSA, come in different flavors, different parameter sets, corresponding to those security categories 1, 3, 5, etc.
Got it. And what about key establishment? Similar timelines?
Pretty similar, yes.
Yeah.
The classical key establishment schemes Diffie-Hellman over finite fields or elliptic curves, MQV variants, RSA key establishment. The 112-bit security level versions are set to be deprecated after 2030, disallowed after 2035.
And the stronger classical ones?
Same story as signatures. The 128-bit and higher classical key establishment schemes will also be disallowed after 2035.
But there's a big but here, isn't there? Regarding harvest now, decrypt later.
Huge but, yes. This is really critical. While those are the general disallowance dates for the algorithms themselves, application-specific guidance.
Like for TLS or secure storage.
Exactly. Those specific guidelines might require, or at least very strongly recommend, migrating to quantum-resistant key establishment, like MLChem, much, much earlier than 2035.
To protect data being transmitted or stored now.
Precisely. Because of that harvest now, decrypt later risk. So don't just look at the 2035 date and think you have plenty of time for key establishment. You might not.
And currently, MLChem is the only approved PQC key establishment scheme.
The only public key-based one, yes. Finalized in FIPS 203. But as we said, more chems are expected from NIST's ongoing process.
Right. And symmetric crypto, just to recap the timeline there.
Much simpler. Existing symmetric standards like AES, SHA-2, SHA-3, if they offer at least 128 bits of classical security, meeting Category 1, they're generally considered okay against near-term quantum threats. No major transition planned away from them.
The main thing is getting off 112-bit symmetric crypto.
Exactly. Those 112-bit security-level symmetric algorithms, like maybe some modes of TDEA3Ds, will be disallowed starting in 2030. So applications using those need to move to AES or stronger SHA variants.
Okay. It really sounds like these application-specific guidelines you keep mentioning are going to be incredibly important. They might override the general algorithm timelines.
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
NIST develops specific guides for crypto use in particular technologies, like FIPS 201 for government ID cards, PIV, or SP 852 for TLS configuration.
Right.
NIST will be revising these kinds of documents. They'll provide tailored guidance on phasing out vulnerable algorithms within those specific contexts.
And they might demand earlier PQC adoption.
Very likely, yes, especially for key establishment. The report explicitly states NIST expects to prioritize migrating key establishment schemes in these updates to counter harvest now, decrypt later in interactive protocols like TLS.
So keep an eye on updates to guidance for TLS, VPN, secure email standards.
Definitely. And NIST is also coordinating with standards bodies like the IETF for Internet protocols and industry groups to get PQC support built into critical protocols in a timely way. They recognize the risks and adoption challenges vary across different sectors.
This has been a really fascinating, and yeah, I have to say, a bit daunting deep dive into this whole PQC transition. So let's try to bring it all together. What's the single most important takeaway for people listening?
I think the key thing is this transition isn't just some theoretical, far-off problem. It's complex, yes, but it's absolutely crucial. It's driven by a very real future threat, quantum computers, but also by a present danger, that harvest now, decrypt later risk.
And NIST is providing the tools and roadmap.
They are standardizing algorithms, developing guidance, but making it happen requires a proactive, coordinated effort from, well, pretty much everyone involved in digital infrastructure.
And for you, our listener, what's the most important thing to understand or maybe start doing?
Understanding these timelines, especially the potential need for early migration for key establishment. Understanding the different strategies like hybrid modes, and really knowing which current crypto standards you rely on and their vulnerabilities. That knowledge is essential if you're responsible for securing data and systems long term.
And procrastination isn't really an option here.
Definitely not. The planning really needs to start now, even if full deployment takes years.
Okay, that's a really critical point. So maybe here's a final thought for everyone listening to really chew on. Given the often very long life cycles of technology systems, think industrial control systems, satellites, infrastructure, and the potentially permanent value of sensitive information.
Yeah.
What proactive steps should you be considering right now to start preparing for this post-quantum era?
Even if a fully capable quantum computer still feels distant, take some time. Think about your organization's specific data security timelines, that X plus Y versus Z. Think about the potential impact if data harvested today is decrypted tomorrow. It's definitely time to start formulating your plan for a quantum secure future. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.